Hey guys, let me show you one of the most fascinating chess games I've played last year. I played it actually against the world champion, but this guy, whose name is Mohammad Shayan Nushat Ibrahim from India, he's just 9 years old. And in 2023, he became the world under-8 chess champion. Just wow. I don't know at what age he started playing chess, probably around 3 or 4 years old. And he's extremely strong. I was playing in the Asian Under 2000 Championship, and this was the penultimate round. We both were among the group of leaders, a little bit below the first and the second places. So we both needed to score a win to compete for the prizes. And this was a crazy game. 101 move. This is the duration of this game. You will be impressed. I was impressed. My opponent was impressed. His dad was impressed. Everyone was impressed. It was the last game of the round. Let me show it to you. It's a fascinating one. So Muhammad opens up with one e4, and I need to play for a win with black. And I know that he plays, if, for example, I sometimes play the French defense. It's my favorite opening, but he usually plays the exchange French. And the meta here is that black, it's very difficult to play for a win with black in such a symmetrical structure. Most likely it will be a draw. I don't want to draw. So I opt for a provocative, ultra-aggressive and combative g6, the modern defense. So the idea is that actually he also chooses the most aggressive approach. He pushes 3 pawns forward. So this is the so-called Austrian attack. So the approach for me in the modern defense is to put pawns like this. So a6, b5, d6, g6, bishop g7, and then later on, sometimes I break with c5. So other times I just develop with bishop b7, knight d7, knight f6, castles, and we can have an opposite side castling. There are many crazy lines in this opening. So he goes for bishop d3, one of the lines, knight d7. It's important to go knight d7 here, because bishop b7 is a little bit worse due to some move order stuff. So knight d7, castles, now c5. This is all, I remember that this is how I should play. So this is all more or less theory. I've spent some time because I was late to the game. Bishop e3, and now knight f6. Bishop e3 actually is not the best move. I think white is supposed to go for e5 here and to attack, and it will be a very crazy position. For example, takes here is one of the moves. But my opponent chose bishop e3, and now I'm out of theory. I go knight f6, still a logical move. He takes, and here I could have taken the initiative by playing knight g4 and taking this bishop, disregarding this pawn. So I was thinking about this move. It was the first thing that came to my mind after taking either by the pawn or the knight. The automatic recaptures should be avoided. This is an important lesson for you. So probably my opponent thought, oh, he's going to recapture by knight or by pawn, and we're going to see what I will do next. But very often automatic recaptures are not necessary, and knight g4 turns out to be a very good move. I was calculating bishop d4, trying to trade this g7 bishop of mine, and I thought that e5 should be strong here. A very messy, very crazy position. Here, the engine agrees. The engine gives already a slight advantage to black. And if white takes here, then black takes here, and the bishop is hanging, and then this pawn will be attacked. That is the idea of the move e5. So the best move for black here is to go c6. Wow, very impressive. So I'll take the bishop, he'll take the knight, and the position will be complicated. Knight d5 will come, but yeah, it's a double-edged position. For some reason, I didn't like. I saw bishop d4, e5, but I didn't like bishop d2. I thought my knight on g4 is not that like impressive. I could take, of course, but then he'll go h3. I'll have to drop back, and I thought that I haven't achieved anything by moving my knight back and forth. In fact, I should have gone for this because I miscalculated. Here, instead of knight g4, which was my candidate move, having spent some time, I took by knight, and I calculated the following variation: takes, e5, knight g4, bishop e4. This is exactly what happened in the game. I taken my rook, and I calculated that first of all, if I go, for example, here, I lose because check, then rook d1, and my king is just naked here, king here, bishop here, check, and if here, then this is a checkmate. So this is not a good option, but I calculated that after, so bishop c5 takes e5, knight g4, bishop e4, I could take the queen first. And if he checks me, then I can drop back, so my queen will not be taken. And if he takes my queen, I thought that I have rook a7. And if he takes me, I have bishop d7. And if he takes, I take, and it's an equalish endgame. Even this, the engine says that white is better. But then I realized that he doesn't have to take by the bishop. He can sacrifice the rook. He can take by the rook. And once I take by the rook, he can go rook d1. And my rook is pinned. And there are no pieces are able to come and save this rook and help me. And I'm just down a piece. So I realized that when he took on c5, no, actually I realized it when I went knight g4, bishop e4. Here is when the realization hit. And I immediately regretted the situation, not going for knight g4 earlier. This is why I should have first gone knight g4, attack this bishop. And once it drops back, all these options become unavailable to white. So here I realized that queen d1 loses. So I cannot trade the queens just yet. I thought maybe I can sack the exchange, bishop d7, bishop takes, queen takes, and I have the two bishops. But I thought it's not too good, and the engine is not impressed. The engine gives +2 to white. There is not enough compensation here. So I thought, okay, I'll go rook a7. Only move, actually, to be not lost, but just worse. And here he goes queen e2. I castle. He kicks me away. My knight drops back. And now queen e3. And it turns out, actually, that this pawn is impossible to be protected. So my opponent is playing extremely well, extremely accurate chess. The pawn is hanging. If I go, for example, queen c7, then knight d5 comes. I will not be able to save this pawn. If queen c6, this will win the queen. So I will have to give up this pawn. Anyway, so I don't need to defend it. I thought I should sacrifice it. I should go for active counterplay. Because my opponent, even though he has this formidable center that is killing my dark squared bishop, he has some weaknesses around the king. I have the two bishops. If I activate, if I get active counterplay, I can have some decent compensation. So instead of defending this c5 pawn, I go knight f5, attacking the queen and preventing to activate my pieces. Queen takes, rook c7. Now I again attack the queen. Queen drops back, because otherwise I had the idea of knight g3 forking the bishop and the rook. So queen drops back to defend g3. And now I go rook c4, putting pressure on this bishop. And I'm threatening b4, because this knight should stay guarding this. And if he goes, for example, a3, something like that, then I thought that I can put more pressure. I don't remember what exactly I wanted to do. Maybe I wanted to develop some pieces. I don't remember. Anyways, the engine finds a nice move, knight d6, because if takes, then takes. This I didn't see, but something I was optimistic about my position here. But instead of a3, my opponent finds a series of best engine moves. Rook d1 attacks the queen. The queen has to move. Queen a5. And now knight d4, a backwards knight move. Backwards knight moves are notoriously tricky and hard to see. And I didn't see this move from afar. And it's a great move because the rook is hit. And if the rook drops back, for example, to c7, then knight b3, my queen is hit. And b6 is controlled, so I have only queen b4, and then a3, and then queen c4, and then bishop d5, and my queen is trapped. So after knight d2, I cannot do anything about this rook. I have to sacrifice it. And here, my coach, after the game, when we discussed it, praised me for a series of decisions I took at this point. So I've sacrificed the rook for a knight and a pawn, which is a necessary measure. At least I have two bishops advantage, but I'm down an exchange. I'm down a bishop for a rook. And my dark squared bishop is still very stupid, not seeing the light of day. He goes knight f3, but here I find a tactic, knight g3. This is a fork, so he has to take. And now I have another fork, queen e3 check. So I have successfully traded my knight for his bishop. And now I have the two bishops against a rook and a knight. A very interesting and imbalanced material situation. Of course, he's up 2 points of material. But the two bishops are a force to be reckoned with, especially when they are not two bishops against a rook and bishop, but two bishops against a rook and a knight. They work very nice if the board is opened. But the board is not yet opened. And my pieces are underdeveloped. So, of course, I'm much worse, but I have some counterplay. He goes rook d4, kicking me away. Another top engine move. This game, my opponent played at 95% accuracy, something like that. So he kicks me. He goes rook d1, doubling up again, top engine choice, controlling the d file. I go bishop f5, trying to attack his pawn. And he opts for another top engine move, rook d8, disregarding this pawn because he knows that this endgame should be close to winning for him. I take the pawn, he takes the rook, trades the queens, and he goes rook d8, pinning my bishop. And it turns out that these pawns, the a6 and b5 pawns, will probably have to die because I will not be in time to save them. I have to trade them for this a pawn, for at least one pawn. So this is what I do. I take the a pawn, I go a5, knight d4 attacks the b pawn, and I trade them. And rook b8, now rook b8 will win this pawn, because yes, I can go e6, temporarily defending this pawn, but knight c6 comes and this pawn will die. And we get a very peculiar endgame. 4 versus 4 on the same flank. So h, g, f, e, h, g, f, e. But a bishop, two bishops versus a rook and a knight. It should be winning. It should be winning, but very tricky, very tricky. And I here create some very important chances for myself. Stay tuned. This game has turned around a little bit later, so do not miss this. Bishop c5 check, activating the bishop. Finally, this bishop is seeing the light of day. Bishop e3. Now this bishop is harassing his pawns. Now I thought that king g3 is much better here than what he did. g3, also a normal move, but now he weakens some squares and my bishops work so beautifully now. So this is the so-called wooden shield number 1, wooden shield number 2. These bishops control very many squares. And the knight's movement are restricted by this e4 bishop. So a nice position, of course, still much worse for me, because a rook is worth a bishop and 2 pawns, and I have just a bishop. But 2 bishops combo compensate a little bit for this deficiency. Knight a6, he tries to rotate the knight, go here, here, here probably, or maybe here first. So I go g5. I try to break open his pawn chain. I need to open up the position. If the position is closed, the bishops are not effective. If the position is open, the board is open, the bishops are monstrous. They can even be stronger than a rook and a knight. So I have to trade some pawns. Now this pawn becomes a weakness, even though I have weaknesses of my own, the h7 and f7 pawns. But I feel confident that if I trade the pawns, I will not lose. If I win some of his pawns, I can play for a win. I still retain some hope of playing for a win. Is it realistic? Let's see. Knight c7, rotating the knight. h5. Whenever you have a weakness, it's always a good idea to push it and to trade it if possible. So this is what I do. He goes knight e8 check. I have to drop back. And now he goes h4, disallowing me from going h4 myself. Now I go bishop d2, but at least his pawns are immobile now because he cannot push, or he can push, but I'll take. And this will help me a little bit. So his position is still close to winning, but it's very tricky to win this, especially with 17 minutes on the clock. Knight f6 attacks my bishop. I drop back. Now this bishop cements my position. And thankfully there is no mate. For example, if I go bishop here, then there are very many problems. For example, rook here, here, and he can just take this pawn. He can even harass me a little bit more, but no, I have king g6, so he has to take. Maybe not now, because the bishop is defending, but rook here, king, knight here. Well, it's unpleasant. Sometime this pawn will fall. So instead of this, I go bishop g6 here, cementing the pawn chain. And I go bishop c3, trying to attack his weakness. His only weakness, real weakness, is on e5. And he goes g4. He just disregards it. A brilliant move. Because if I take, I get mated. g5 check, king g7, rook g8, checkmate. The rook jointly with the knight and the pawn create this nice mating thread. So I have to, I cannot take, I mean, so I have to do something else. I take on g4. And now he takes on g4, and this is a point in the game where he went wrong. He should have, I think, went for rook check, and now take with check. This is the difference, winning some time. Instead, he just took with check. And his rook is on b8, not on g8. And this is a difference. And here I can go king g7. And it's not that, but it's not pleasant. Even the engine at first glance says it's a draw, but then says it should be lost. So I go forward. I risk everything. I go forward. And actually, when the engine thinks a little bit longer, the engine says that this is the good strategy. So I take both the knight and the pawn. And I'm not afraid of being checkmated because I have to be active in this position. King g3 defends both. Now bishop e3 check. And he goes king f4. Of course, he could have gone king h3, but then bishop f5 pins him, and it's a very awkward position, and it will be a draw. So if he goes here, also possible, but then I take. And he decided to go king f4, because when I take here, then he has rook h8 and knight h5, f6, and this will fall, and it will be losing. So of course I cannot take on h4 just yet, but I check him first. He blocks, and now I take on h4. And now there is no, after a check, bishop h5, the knight cannot jump somehow to f6 in one move. So my bishop is saved. Rook h6, bishop c1, rook f6, and here he offered me a draw. He realized that he's not winning this game anymore. He gave up one pawn, but he didn't achieve anything. And I declined this draw because, you know what? I need to play for a win. The two bishops are nice. He's a little bit pinned. He has this weakness. I don't think I can lose this. So I go bishop g6 and I say, let's play. He goes king f3. I go king g5. Maybe in some variations I want to trap this rook. He goes knight c4. I go here. Now the threat is bishop g5, trapping the rook. He goes king e2, sidestepping. Now he can drop back with the rook, which he does. I go king g7. I now try to find some plan. I remember a game, young Krzysztof Duda versus Magnus Carlsen, where I think Duda had a bishop and two connected passed pawns, and Magnus had a rook. And I don't remember, I think it turned out to be a draw at the end, but it was very tricky to defend. And I know that probably, practically speaking, it's very often a winning position. So if I can win this pawn and trade, for example, one bishop for one knight, I'm going to push for a win, definitely. But I need to win this pawn first. And it's a very hard task. Knight d6. Now we maneuver. I attack the pawn. I try to control as many squares with my bishops as possible to prevent him from infiltrating with the rook. And the other bishop attacks this pawn. This knight controls this pawn. And also the bishops control squares around the king to disallow the king from entering the game, which is also important. So this is the meta strategy. Rook a7 tries to cut me off. Now I take the knight. He attacks me. If I take here, he takes, I take. This is a draw. This is not a connected pass pawn. If pawns are standing like this, it's good. You can play for a win. If pawns are standing like this, you will never win this. White will just go like king e3 and we'll just wait, put the rook on the fourth rank and we'll do nothing and black cannot break through. So, of course, I don't want this trade to happen. So I go bishop c6. Rook a5, he defends the pawn. Now I try to rotate my king. He tries to overprotect the pawn. I attack the bishop. I check him. I drop back. I attack the knight. I check him. I go bishop f4, again attacking the pawn. And we do this with 5 minutes on the clock each. So we are both playing practically on increment. Rook a5 defends the pawn. Now I attack it again. I want to take. But he has this clever move. If I take, then check, and it's a fork, I can lose this game easily. So I go king g4, sidestepping, he takes my knight, I check him, we repeat moves a couple of times, and I don't want to draw, so I drop back. Again, trying to control the movements of this knight by my bishop. You should position your knight, your bishop 2 squares across the enemy's knight to control its movements. Very important rule. Knight g8, now he wants to go here. Okay, I drop back. I go king f5. Now I again want to take this, but he again doesn't want me to take it. I attack the knight. If he goes, for example, rook a7 or something like that, then if I'm able to trade this for this and take this pawn and not give up this pawn, then I get the endgame that I want. But here he doesn't go rook a7, he goes knight b8, attacking my bishop. I go bishop d5, and finally I'm like, am I winning? Am I finally winning this pawn? He cannot do anything about it. If he goes knight d7, I'll just take, and if he takes, I'll take. And the engine says it's a draw, of course. But now I have the very endgame that I was talking about. I will push my pawns, I will march forward with the king, the bishop will cover all the checks, and the pawns will march. And it's very difficult to defend this. I have like 60 or maybe even 70% probability of winning this endgame, I thought. So I was very optimistic about this. I took on e5, and then he saw knight b6, and I was like, oops, he wants to take this. And if I drop back like this, for example, then he can go knight c4. And I have to block this, and he'll go here, and we repeat moves. So I have to do something else here. And here, I thought bishop c7 is clever, because if he takes here, I'll take here. And if he goes here, then we'll just trade, and again, we get the same endgame that I like. So I thought, okay, very nice. Bishop c7, pinning. And here he finds a brilliant move. He is the one sacrificing the rook. Rook takes d5 check. And suddenly I realized that, yeah, unfortunately I'm losing. Have to take. He takes, and this endgame is a dead draw. Because he just disallows me from making any forward progress. I try maneuvering a little bit, but to no avail. I push the pawn, but it cannot be pushed further. And he will sooner rather than later give up the knight for the pawn. And here we agree to a draw on the 101st move. Wow. So it's a very strong player, Muhammad Shayan Nushat Ibrahim. You probably will hear his name later on. Maybe he will become one of the youngest grandmasters. Maybe he will become one of the classical chess world champions. Who knows? Who knows? If you enjoyed the game, do drop a comment. And the final result, this was the penultimate game, and in the final game I won. So I scored 6 out of 9. And we actually both scored 6 out of 9 with this young gentleman. But he had a better Buchholz, which is like a tiebreaker to determine who is higher on the list. So he took the 5th place, and I took the 6th place. And there were just 5 prizes in the tournament. So I was this close, because we drew, and he also won his last game. So he also was on 6 out of 9. So congrats to my opponent on such a marvelous game. And I think a draw is a logical result. I could have lost it, of course, but next time I'll try to do better in such a tournament. And thank you everyone who supported me. See you in the next one.